Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth. I'm Cesar Carino, your host, and we have a guest today that everybody in town knows, and just one of our wonderful, wonderful people, Bill Heyl. Bill, you and I have the same problem. Neither of us can hear too well.
You're right.
Now,
At least
if
me.
you don't hear me, you just raise your hand or finger and I'll just write it down because we want to hear what you have to say.
All right.
Tell us when you were born, Bill, and where.
I was born on a farm where the Norton High School is now located. My father was a tenant farmer, and I was born December 27th, 1917.
Wow, that makes you about how many years old now?
80.
You'll be
80
81 your
years.
next birthday. 81 your next birthday.
81 my next birthday.
And what about brothers and sisters?
I had two sisters. One died at the age of 94 and the other one at 92. Two sisters. And then my father died when I was 2 years old. And later on my mother remarried and I had two stepsisters and a stepbrother.
Now, tell us who your sisters were, their names.
Well, one was, Hazel was Hazel Beck. At one time they owned Ringer's Locker out
Ringer's
West
Locker,
Town.
that's right.
And the other one was Edna Workman. And she lived in Wadsworth, but she didn't have any children. And
Tell us who the Beck children are.
Beck had one boy. My sister Hazel had one boy, Bob Beck, and he still lives in Norton.
Norton. And your father's name and your mother's maiden name.
My mother's maiden name was Baker, and my father's name was William.
And your mother's first name was what?
My mother's first name was Minnie.
Minnie. Then
And my stepfather's name was Roy Snyder.
Roy Snyder.
Right.
From Norton?
No, he was originally from, from Pickway, but he moved up here and he worked on the railroad here in Wadsworth most of his life.
Did he live in Wadsworth?
And he lived in Wadsworth.
Where did you live in Wadsworth when you came
On
here?
Park Street.
Park Street. What year did you come to Wadsworth?
In 1920, I started school here in the first grade at
Franklin?
no, at Central.
Central.
And I think it was 1924.
1924. So you came here when you were...
Yeah, I came here just before school started in 24, and one of the reasons we did live in Barberton for about a year, and my mother didn't want me to, over in Barberton they required that you get vaccinated.
I see.
And she was worried about that.
In those days it wasn't very safe.
But they had a house here and one in Barberton, so they moved over here, and I've been here ever since, practically.
Now, who was the principal of the high school or the school when you were there?
When I was Mr. Mayhew.
Mr. Mayhew. And do you remember your teachers?
Well, I remember them all. I had Lulu Knopf in the
Everybody had Lulu Knopf.
first grade. In second grade, I had a very beautiful woman, had a beauty trophy, because she used to send me over to her house to deliver stuff to her mother who lived with her, and I saw the trophy, and her name was Sullivan. And then...
You remember her first name?
I never
Well, we
did know.
just call them Miss or Mrs.
Miss Sullivan. Oh, and then third grade, I had Dorothy Wright, who became Dorothy Rohr and taught here for many years.
Mm-hmm.
In the fourth grade, I had a Mrs. Utes at Franklin. even back in those days, you went where they told you.
Yes.
And we had too many kids at Central, so they sent me to Franklin.
Right.
And then in the 5th grade, I had Mrs. Her husband was the coach, Stokes.
Mr. Stokes.
Blanche Stokes was her name. And I went back to Central in the 5th grade. And Miss Blanche Stokes was an aunt of Jane Barrett, a teacher at the high school.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And then in the 6th grade, I went back to Franklin, and my 6th grade teacher was a man named, I never did know his name, but it was B.O. Keeler.
B.O. Keeler. Why'd you call him B.O. Keeler? For obvious reasons? Why'd they call him B.O. Keeler? Why did they call him B.O.?
B.O., I don't know. I think his first name was Bertle or something.
I would have changed my name if I would have been Mr. Keeler.
As kids, we never thought of that.
No, that's right. Then you went all the way through high school, and at that time, who would have been the high school principal and the junior high school principal?
Well, the junior high school principal was the Mayhew was the high school, and O.J. Work was the junior high principal.
High. Now, do you remember when Mr. Work first came to?
When Mr. Work first came, he came in 23, and he told me one time that he had taught in Wellsville and wanted to move back up in this part of the state because he was a native of Millersburg, Holmes County.
And Wellsville was where? Down in the southern part?
And Wellsville was down on the river.
Right.
And he had two choices, Wadsworth and another school, and he chose Wadsworth because the front lawn at Wadsworth was such a beautiful lawn, and it was new school, and everything was new, and he thought it was beautiful. And at that time, the lawn went all the way out to
Main Street.
And then later on, the school gave that front part of the lawn to the city, and they widened Main Street.
At one time,
And there was no alley like there is now, and that lawn went clear over there, so it was a fairly large lawn.
Nice lawn.
And it probably was pretty.
Mm-hmm. And then, during your high school years, do you remember any teachers who are probably dead now?
Just about all of them are dead, but I remember every one of them. Art Wright
Is dead?
It was, he came here when I was in the 8th grade, and at that time I played basketball in a junior high team, and the only time we could get the gym to play was 7 o'clock in the morning. So Art Wright would come, he was our coach in the 8th grade. He was a coach in the high school too. So he would come down and conduct the practice at 7 until 8 o'clock, and then teach a full load, and then in the evening he'd coach the varsity and junior varsity. So he spent a long school day, and he coached us all near, and it was.
And who were some of the other teachers then that you remember?
Oh, Kenny Giffen. He was my
speech.
Algebra and bookkeeping teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Dwight Patterson was a biology teacher. Willard Huntsberger was the Southmore history teacher. Mrs. Giffen taught some, just substituted at that time. Edith Nubio was my typing teacher. I believe she's still living as far as I know.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Leland Sloots was a woodworking teacher for 1 year, and then the other year he left, and Harvey Grunwald taught that. And Harvey Grunwald also taught history. And Lou Hall taught science. Dorothy Billman taught French and English. Of course, Mr. Work taught
Math.
7th and 8th grade math.
Yeah.
Wonderful teacher.
And he was good all the way around. He was a good person all the way around.
A good person all the way around, but he was a wonderful, well, yes, he was a good person. And I think he was a little ahead of his time teaching math, because he taught me a lot of things that they didn't teach at that time.
Is that right? That's good.
Yeah.
Now, when you graduated from high school in
1936.
1936, what was happening in the world?
Well, about that time, we had a pretty bad depression. From about 1930 on, things were rough. And there was a heck of a lot of people that there was no relief. There was, my dad worked on the rail, my stepfather worked on the railroad, and he had a steady job. A lot of my relatives didn't. So a lot of my relatives used to show up at our house at mealtime, we had a big garden. And
did you always live on Park Street then?
yes, we always lived on Park Street. We had a garden. We owned some land up on Durling Drive that the school now owns. And we put a lot of vegetables out, and my mother would can probably 1,000 cans a year.
We did the same thing, over 1,200.
And everybody did that. Right. And
bad.
another strange thing, everybody on Park Street just about had a little chicken coop.
Yes.
And had a little flock of chickens, so we ate a
right.
lot of eggs.
Had eggs, and we ate a lot of eggs in those
We
days.
ate a lot of eggs.
We didn't know about cholesterol and things like that.
We didn't know about cholesterol.
No. Now then, where did you work when you got out of high school?
When I got out of high school, in fact, a week before I graduated, Mr. Houston, who worked at the B&W, asked me if I wanted a job, and I thought, boy, sure do. He said, you'll have to start right away. And I said, I got a week of school. He said, oh, they'll let you out. So I talked to Mr. Work, and he said, yeah, I could. My grades are pretty good. I could. So I started to B&W a week before I graduated.
Doing what?
Huh?
Doing what? What did you do?
I was working in the engineering department. I was kind of a flunky, filing blueprints and startup job.
But it was money.
Huh?
It was money.
Yeah, it was money. $52 a month.
Wow. But you're
Figured out to 26 cents an hour.
26 cents an hour. How long did you work there?
I worked there until I went into the service, service in 1942.
1942.
And I went back there when I was discharged.
Now, tell us about your service years.
Well, in the service, I was lucky. I didn't know anything about the service. They asked me what branch of service I'd like to go in, and I said, oh, the infantry or quartermaster. I didn't know anything about it. So that day, everybody was sent to the Air Force, so that's where I went.
And what did you do in the Air Force?
In the Air Force, I did clerical work most of the time, and finance work, and yes, it would be clerical. And
Finance.
and I went through the ranks and I went to clerical school in the Army. And then they sent me to Salt Lake City, which is the the Air Force training grounds for the entire Army Air Force. And there, I went from a private to
Corporal?
a corporal, sergeant, and they were promoting me in Salt Lake City every month. So one of the officers I worked with talked me into applying to be a warrant officer. So I applied for that, and I became a warrant officer at Salt Lake, which is a warrant officer is between an officer and a enlistment man. And it was pretty hard, and then they assigned me right where I was, which is the headquarters of the 3rd Air Replacement Wing of the 3rd Air Force. And I typed orders for organized units. We organized the school, and I became a supply officer. And what we had to do was form complete units. Well, they would send soldiers in, and it wouldn't be what we needed. So we started school out at the fairgrounds at Salt Lake City. And we even had to teach a lot of them English. And the funniest thing about that was that our English teacher was a British guy.
Oh, really?
And we had to teach them armament. We had to teach them typing. So my job became pretty much there as finance and supply office. In the meantime, well, here I was a warrant officer, and I was an Air Force supply and financial officer, and we had 2 bases under us. So I was the chief financial officer over those bases, and one of them had a major and one had a captain, and here I am, a warrant officer, giving them orders. And the only advantage I had, my boss was a general, so I didn't have any trouble.
That's a nice advantage.
Huh?
That was a good advantage.
It was a good advantage. And
having him. Well, then when you got out of the service, what did you do? When you got out of the service?
When I got out of the service, I went back to the B&W for about 3 months, and I could see they were having so many people come back, and it was a real chore to give them all a job. So Mr. Worth Westenbarger from Wadsworth, who's the manager of the employment service in Akron, and he asked me if I'd like to work over there, and it sounded like a pretty good job, so I went to the Akron employment office and worked there for, and when they transferred Mr. Westenbarger to Barberton, I went along with him. So I worked between the 2 places for about 5 years.
Yeah. Now, in the meantime, did you get married?
I got married in Salt Lake City in 1943.
To whom?
To Mary Weinsheimer.
From
Wadsworth.
Right.
We'd been engaged about 2 years.
Now, tell us who Mary Weinsheimer's father was and family.
Mary's father was Flaren Weinsheimer, who was a tailor and had a small clothing store in Wadsworth.
With Curtis's.
And then he later went with Curtis.
Right.
But in the meantime, when the war came along, he went out to California and took the family and worked in the airplane industry. So she was living in Los Angeles when we decided to get married after I became a warrant officer. And she came up from Los Angeles on the train, and we were married in Salt Lake City.
Now, Bill, tell us who the children were from your union with Mary Weinsheimer.
We had 2 children. Pat, who was born in 1944, later married and gave me 3 grandkids.
And to whom did she marry?
She married Robert Klein.
I had him as a student.
Did you? And then Kathy came along in 47.
Does that mean that Kathy's now?
And she is now
50?
Mrs. Roger Grickney.
Right.
And he's a teacher and was a teacher. He's retiring this year from Wadsworth City Schools with 30 years service.
In mathematics. In mathematics.
In mathematics, right.
What do your daughters do?
Well, Kathy is a kindergarten teacher who will be teaching next year in Overlook School. And Roger hasn't made up his mind since he retired.
No, I mean, well, yes, Roger and Kathy, but now what do the other, tell me about your other daughter's work.
That's the only 2.
Well, we have Kathy.
Kathy and Pat.
And Pat, but I mean,
Pat, and
what
then
does Pat do?
Now I have 5 great-grandsons.
From Pat?
From yeah.
From Pat. But now, what does Pat do? Where does she work?
She has only worked a little bit. She's been a home wife.
Home wife, okay.
And
now Mary had sisters.
Mary had one sister.
One sister.
Ruth.
Ruth.
Ruth Schneider.
Ruth Schneider. Now, does Ruth still live in town?
She still lives in Wadsworth.
Tell us who Ruth's family is.
Ruth has 2 children. A boy who lives down around Cincinnati, Westchester.
And his name is?
Mark Schneider.
And how old is Mark?
And the girl is married to John
Moss.
Moss, who is presently the city auditor in Wadsworth.
Right. Now, we want to make sure that we get all of these people in order. We have Mr. Weinsheimer, and what was his wife's name?
Margaret.
Margaret, that's right. Margaret, and now what did we call her father? What did he call himself when he was the tailor?
Call himself?
He called himself Wines the Tailor, didn't he?
Yeah, they always called him Wines the Tailor.
Wines the Tailor. Right, now.
And his shop was a real meeting place for a lot of guys just to...
Dick Huntsberger. People like Dick Huntsberger went there. And the Curtises.
Then he went to Curtis's after the war.
Right.
And worked there until he retired.
Right. He was a little man and bald-headed.
Yeah, he was bald-headed.
And white hair.
Yeah.
Now,
he could do anything.
Anything.
He was always doing something for somebody, always making stuff, always he playing in the band.
That's right,
in
he was
an Eagle,
very good.
In the Legion Drum and Bugle Corps.
Now, when you used to go in front of his shop to go to Brenny's, did you ever think that he was going to be your father-in-law?
Never.
Never thought that.
Never entered my mind.
Never entered your mind. But you've had a very happy life with Mary, and now Ruth.
Yeah, we've been married 55 years.
55 years. Now, Ruth's husband
died.
Died.
He died about 4 years ago.
Yes. And what did he do?
He worked most of his life at Cyberlink, and then when they kind of went under, he was transferred over to Firestone.
Now, almost everybody in town knows you because you were associated with the schools, but almost everybody in town knows Ruth also. Tell us why. Ruth, what did Ruth do that everyone would know her? Ruth.
Ruth, well, she's very active in the Mennonite church.
But what did she do here at the school?
Oh, and she worked in the school at Central and at the high school.
And what did she do there?
She was the secretary at both of them.
Wasn't she the attendance officer?
She was yeah, took care of the attendance at the high school.
So everybody in town at one time or another called Ruth.
That's right, and they all knew Mary too, because she was a secretary at the high school.
They wanted to get to Mary next. Now, why would they all know Mary? Almost every kid in Wadsworth would know Mary.
Well, I think because of the fact that she had put in 22 years at the school as a secretary at Valley View, Overlook, Franklin, and the high school.
Right. She broke in about 10 principals, didn't she? Yeah.
And at the high school, yes, she did.
She broke in a lot of them. Now,
I used to, and when she thought so much of Art Wright that I got in the habit of calling him God.
Oh, really? And he liked that too, I bet. Yeah. Now then, since all of the kids in Wadsworth one time or another have to go through Roger, your son-in-law, and through Kathy, your daughter, we would almost have to say that everybody in Wadsworth has had some kind of interaction with your family.
That's right.
But there's a lot more to come. Now, we want to get back to your family in a few minutes, but we will run out of time unless we talk right now about your school or your work with the schools after you left the employment office in Barberton. You came to Wadsworth. What did you do here in Wadsworth right off the bat?
In Wadsworth?
Yes.
Well, I was they called it clerk treasurer then.
But that's not what you did right off the bat, is it?
Yeah.
But when you left Barberton?
When I left Barberton, I came right over here. I left Barberton on Friday and started here on Monday.
As the
Mr.
clerk?
Burkholder,
Okay.
I never could figure out why he picked me to work, and it's a strange thing. He said two things. I was secretary of bowling league, and he said you did a good job there. And he said anybody that was a supply officer and a finance officer in the Army had to know how to...
Mr. Burkholder tells the story. He was the superintendent when I was here. He tells the story that one of the reasons he hired you was that you were a military man and knew discipline, and he did.
Yeah.
He was a military man. He was what, a commander?
He's a commander in the Navy.
Yes, a commander. And he was a strict disciplinarian. And he said that. Now then, when you first began, who was the clerk treasurer whom you replaced?
Mary Ellen Anderson.
Right, Mary Ellen. She had another name though too. Mary Ellen what?
I forget her married name.
Mary Ellen Anderson, and then she...
That was her maiden name.
That's her maiden name.
And she was... I forget her. I forget her. She was married twice.
Yes,
her
twice
first husband died,
right.
and then she was married to a fellow named Bill... can't remember his name.
Yeah, we'll come to it here in a minute. Who was the clerk treasurer before Mary Ellen?
Before Mary Ellen, they had a variety. They used to just, I think sometimes, a fellow named Holben was one time.
Yes, Art Holben years ago.
And
then a Treva.
Huh?
Treva
Booth?
Yes.
She was my secretary.
She was your secretary.
At the end. Before that, she was the superintendent's secretary.
Superintendent secretary. A lovely soul.
She died here about 5 years ago.
What I wanted to establish, Bill, was that it wasn't much of a job at one time. Not that Mary Ellen didn't do a tremendously good job. I don't mean that.
It just kind of evolved.
Grew and grew.
Grew.
But before you left it, it's a full-fledged job for which now a person has to be certified by the state.
Yeah, I guess so.
So it really grew in that period of time.
I did get I belonged to the Organization of Business Officials in the state of Ohio, and they had a group that had credentials, and they would give you a designation, and I was given the designation of business official, business manager, and it was the second one in the state. so they don't do it anymore. Now it requires college.
By law, by law.
I just learned it by going along and talking to people that, well, one of the men I talked to when I first started, if I get puzzled, was a fellow named John McCandless, who was the business manager at Barberton and was Dr. McCandless of Wadsworth's father.
Sleeth McCandless.
Huh?
Sleeth McCandless.
Yeah, and he was very helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Now, how about Mr. Herger?
Mr. Herger, I didn't know at that time, but when we consolidated with
Centralized,
I asked Mr. Herger if he'd come in and help me for a few months and kind of merge the books and stuff, and he ended up working with me for about
20 years.
about 10 years, and he was one of the finest men I ever knew, and undoubtedly had the best handwriting.
Oh, I've never seen anything like it.
Even when he was 80 years old, I would have him put the names on the diplomas because he could make it. He used that old
Spencerian.
Right. And
did a beautiful job.
He was
now, Bill. People hear the word clerk of the Board of Education. They think it's a secretary. Describe to us exactly what legal responsibilities a clerk has.
Well, actually, the clerk had to keep the books, keep the minutes, and of course do anything else. Those are the two big things, but we did everything.
Well, what about legally the clerk being the appointing officer? Before a person can be employed by the school, the clerk has to sign it, correct?
We would appoint him and then we'd give him a contract. The clerk just signed it.
Clerk signed it. It's a legal responsibility. It's not a secretarial thing. It's a very strong legal. Now, what about the responsibility legally for the finances?
Well, you were responsible for all the finances.
And what was the budget?
When I came here, as I recall, in 1951, the entire school budget was $450,000.
You flip that out in a month now.
They spend that a week.
Yes, a week.
That's about a week's budget now.
What is it now?
I think it's probably over 20 million.
20 million, no question about it. Now, one of the things that Wadsworth did, and was the first one in the entire state, was the pay-as-you-go, and you're responsible for that. Would you explain that in its entirety?
Well, that the library did that to build the original, not the original, the library that's presently there, and they accumulated money for 5 years and then had all the money to build the library. And I thought that was a good idea, and there was no reason the school couldn't do it. And talked to Mr. Burkholder with it, and he was pretty pessimistic, but he said, we'll try, and we'll go in on a united front. So we talked to the board, and they bought it, and it's worked pretty good.
Very well. No interest.
We had no debt until they just passed this last issue for all these editions, and it's worked good. There's two philosophies on that, though. Some people think that the people who are going to use the thing and not using it should help pay for it. That means that you issue bonds so that the ones coming along will pay, while others, and they don't think that the people living here presently should pay all that. But it's a good business.
One way or the other, and it's very good business.
I can remember when I first came here, we didn't have enough. Mr. Burkholder, I'll never forget, this shows the difference between now and then. The lawn at Central looked pretty bad, and I said, well, we ought to get some fertilizer. and put that on the lawn. Well, I don't know if we can, he said, but we went and got $15 worth of fertilizer and fertilized the front yard. Now you can't imagine being that hard up.
No, but it was very close at the time.
We were living pretty close to the
bone.
We never finished a year in the red. In the
All the years that
in the
you were-
31 years I was here.
31. I was going to ask you how many years it was, 31. Now, during that period of time, two other big things happened in Wadsworth. One was the establishment of the credit union, and you were responsible for that. And
Yeah, we started we originally called it Wadsworth City Schools Credit Union when we chartered it under the federal regulations, and we started that in 1960 with $200. It's now called the Medina County Federal Credit Union with assets approaching 19 million.
Wow. Who gave the first money for that?
Well, in order to join, you had to put in $5. So we started with 40 people. That's how we got the $200.
Who was the first one to throw his $5 in?
Oh, I don't know who was the first. Probably Mr. Worker, myself. We all had a meeting, and 10 of us signed the original charter. And I think Catherine Cartwright, who I don't know where she lives now, and I are the only two that are living yet.
Tell us who Catherine Cartwright was, Bill.
Catherine Cartwright was our secretary up at Lincoln School, and her husband was a teacher at Lincoln School.
And what was his first name?
His first name was Art.
Art Cartwright.
And I'll never forget when Mr. Burkholder hired him. It was kind of funny, and because he came out and he said, do you know, he had been interviewing, and he said, do you know an Art Cartwright? And I said, yeah. What kind of a teacher do you think he'd make? I said, well, he's not a teacher. I said, he works as a carpenter. And finally, we got it straightened out. I was talking about a fellow from Wadsworth named Art Cartwright, and his was another fellow.
That's why I wanted you to say it, because I want you to tell the difference between the Art Cartwright, who was the teacher, and the one that we know and we've known all of our lives.
Well, the Art Cartwright was the teacher. He was a very good musician and taught music.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But he taught the 6th grade.
But he didn't
In
pound
fact, he taught Kathy.
He taught your daughter.
It was all the time I was there, it was the only divided class in the school.
Oh, really?
It was the 5th and 6th grade. And he tackled that, and he did a good job. And the other Art Cartwright, he was on our championship wrestling team.
Yes, right. How old is our Art Cartwright, the one that we know? How old is the one that we know? How old?
He's about 75.
6.
7?
6.
6.
Yeah.
Well, I was pretty close.
Yeah. He graduated with my brother.
Oh.
That's how I happen to know.
Oh.
Now, they're two distinct ones. They're not related at all.
No, they're not
Okay.
related.
But just want to
Both
make
fine
sure.
men, but
Oh, yeah, great people.
Art Cartwright was, I think he lives in Florida now.
That's possible, I don't know. Now, that was one thing that happened. First and foremost, we had the pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go.
Oh, pay-as-you-go?
We got that. Then we got the credit union. Now, tell us a little bit about the first years of the credit union.
Well, the first years Mr. Work was the treasurer. He needed six quarters to qualify for Social Security, and since he was the only one that could be paid, he was the treasurer, and he took care of that. And we in the old Methodist church, we used the basement down there where my office was at the time for the credit union office, and he worked with me down there. And I think Earl Joachim was the second president. I was the first president, and after the first year, after Mr. Work got his 6 quarters in, he quit, and I became the treasurer then, and I was the treasurer for the next, I guess, 20 years. And
Forever.
And we've had a lot of presidents. Chuck Parsons was president one year, and Chuck Hawley from
Medina,
and
Brunswick. Chuck was in Brunswick at the time.
yeah, Brunswick.
He was a teacher, but he's
and
lives in
also
Liverpool.
Chuck Chapman was president, and Earl Joachim, as I said, and Chuck and Art Cartwright was, and Judge, I can't think of the judge's name up in Medina that was the auditor.
Was the auditor?
Yeah, he was the auditor.
Barry.
Yeah, Judge Barry was president. He's still on the, I think he's still on the board.
Ralph Barry,
right.
Berry.
Because we expanded the credit union, and we made it, when we made the original charter, the fellow that was giving me the advice, who was a teacher over in Coventry, said that...
You know his name?
Mary, his wife's name, let's see. He's since died.
You're not talking about Jerry, are you?
Huh?
You're talking about Jerry? He was a
little heavy,
chubby man.
Yeah.
Jerry.
Yeah, he became treasurer. He was treasurer of the Summit County.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It was Jerry, I can't think right now. He advised us to keep it pretty expansive, so when we chartered it could be the only school credit union in Medina County. And that's how it grew. Now they're having a big controversy in the United States Congress because we've expanded it into quite a few other.
Yes, right.
And
but it's a wonderful tool for these teachers all those years.
It's a good thing.
Very good. Now, that's very interesting. We might be able to come back to that, but tell us the third thing that you were heavily involved with.
Oh, and the Steiner Youth Center.
Tell us about that.
Well, the board appointed me as to a committee to see how we could get a swimming pool in Wadsworth. And we talked about it, and an enclosed swimming pool. And one day I was in the bank, and I talked to Mr. Work, and I said, I'm hunting ways to get the money. And he said, I know where you could get some money. And I said, where? He said, well, Steiner Estate left some money, and maybe you could get on. He said, go talk to Carl Shantz.
Right. Now let's get the Steiner Estate. That's Henry Steiner.
Henry Steiner.
Who was with Steiner and Rohr.
Right.
An automobile agency that sold Chryslers and Plymouths, right?
Right.
And they actually had their store right where? Tell us where the store was, Bill.
Yeah.
Where was it? Where did they have their...
They had their agency where the school board office is now.
Tell us where that is geographically.
It's on College Street, right beside Isham School.
Right, okay. Because 50 years from now, that may not be here, you know.
And so I went over to see Carl, and he says, yeah. And so he got out the Henry Steiner's will and showed me how he had left it. And he had left in his will a provision that the money from his estate, when there was no more heirs, he had no children.
No, no children at all.
So would go to build a home for homeless boys in the Wadsworth in Wadsworth Township. And it was left to the judgment of the trustees to, if it wasn't feasible, then they could, as long as it went for the benefit of boys, homeless and needy boys in Wadsworth. And I said, well, this would be a good thing. And there isn't enough boys to build a home. Mm-hmm. And he was very receptive, and so I wrote a letter to him. He said, well, how would we develop the underprivileged so we could, I said, well, I wrote a letter and explained that we had a school lunch program to help the poor children of Wadsworth, and if we could build this swimming pool, we could let the poor children of Wadsworth use it free. And he said, how could you identify them? I said, well, anybody getting a free lunch would
That's right.
be.
That's legal.
So as far as I know, they're still using that method.
They use that method. Mm-hmm.
And so we talked, and I wrote that letter, and still got a copy of it. We worked on, the trustees at that time were Carl Shantz and a fellow named Curtis, Cookie Curtis from the Ohio Farmers, mm-hmm. and the banker.
Sterling Sechrist?
At Citizens.
Sterling Sechrist?
No. The older guy. What?
Sailors?
Sailors. Tom Sailors were the trustees. Mm-hmm. So we got Earl Gottwald and a few other people interested in it.
And Earl was what at the time?
Earl was mayor at the time.
Mayor at the time.
And they got together with the trustees, and they agreed to do it. And the $40,000 that Steiner had left at the time he wrote the will, or had it, the will, had grown to about $300,000.
$500,000.
$500,000.
I was on council at the time.
Oh, yeah. Well, it had grown. It was only $40,000, I think, when he had the will. And the school actually contributed part of that because we bought the Steiner and Moore building, and I think we paid $20,000 or $30,000, so we got our money back from the use that we make of that. And it was a good deal for everybody.
Very good deal. Now, you've been involved with three major things, but a lot of other smaller things in Wadsworth, and as a result of that, you were given a plaque. It's called the Hall of Fame in 1998. And I'm going to show this, and I'm going to read it, because it says a lot of things that you're too humble to tell us about. But I want everyone to know about them. And then we'll talk about a couple if we have some more time, okay? We'll talk about them. This is Bill Heyl, Hall of Fame 1998. Bill went to Franklin School for 4th and 6th grade. He graduated from Wadsworth High School in 1936 and was president of the senior class. You didn't tell us that, Bill. So president of the senior class. He enjoyed in participating in sports in high school and still is an avid Grizzly fan. That we all know, right? Hmm? You're an avid Grizzly fan.
Yeah, sure am.
You bet. During World War II, he served in the Air Force for 3.5 years. He was a second lieutenant doing personnel and supply work at a base near Salt Lake City. He is a member of Grace Lutheran Church, and he taught Sunday school. You didn't tell us that either, did you? You taught Sunday school.
Yeah, about 20 years.
About 25 years, it says
25.
here. And served several times on the church council. You didn't tell us that either.
No.
This is good we have this. Bill was the clerk treasurer and business manager of Wadsworth City Schools from June 1st, 1951 to June 1st, 1982. That's 31 years. During that time, he instituted the pay-as-you-go system for capital improvements, which still is used today. He was instrumental in getting the funds for the Steiner Youth Center, and in 1960 established the Wadsworth City Schools Credit Union, which is now the Medina County Credit Union. We know about that one. He was a member of the Civil Service Commission. You didn't tell us that.
No, I forgot that.
That's right, see? And is currently a member of the American Legion. We knew that. The Cribbage Club. You didn't tell us that one. The Cribbage Club.
Oh.
Cribbage Club, yeah.
Yeah,
And the
I'm still in
Lions
that.
Club. And the Lions Club. Serving in 1963 as the Lions president. You didn't tell us that either.
No.
Good we have this. He married Mary Weinsheimer in 1943, and they have 2 daughters, 5 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. In his free time, Bill enjoys golf, bowling, and gardening. Now, a couple of years ago, you had some physical problems, but you
I had a stroke in December of '95.
but you've come along very well, haven't you?
Well, yes, but it sure slows you down.
Well, at 81, you're a whole lot better off than many people are.
Oh,
at
yes.
51.
I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, you're in good shape. And Bill, one of the other things that I want to show here is the first graduating class of 1924 of the new high school. Now we
Auditorium.
in the auditorium. We are now thinking that that's an old building, but at one time it was a brand new building.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when you went down to Franklin School, it was only 7 or 8 years old at the time.
Right.
As a
It
new
was
school.
built in 1915.
And you went down there in 24, 25?
25 or
25, so maybe 10 years old. About 10 years old. It was a fairly new school.
And I'll tell you, right now it looks better than it did in 1925.
Really, it does.
Really does.
Now, and the reason I wanted to mention that right now, Bill, is that during the time that you were the clerk treasurer, how many schools were built in Wadsworth?
Well, complete high school and Valley View and Overlook.
3.
3.
Now, how much did the high school cost at the time that we built it? And what year did we build it?
Well, we put so many additions up there, I don't really know how much it totally cost. I know one thing. The total cost of the new gym complex was only $1,700,000. And today that same building I know would cost $15 million.
Oh, easily, no problem. How much did Valley View cost?
Valley View cost less than $1 million. My recollection would be about 800,000. The original, but there'd been
The original.
an addition.
Then
But that was built out of the pay-as-you-go.
Overlook.
Overlook only cost about 400,000.
Right. Now, how much is the new junior high school going to cost?
The high school?
The new junior high school, or the middle school, I guess they're going to call it. The new one.
Well, that has had, the original building was grades 1 through 12. That only cost about $60,000.
60.
That was back in 1907.
1907. What about the one they're going to build?
The new one?
The new one.
I don't have any idea what that'll cost.
You can be assured that it's not going to be $1.7 million.
How much?
It's not going to be $1.7 million.
Oh, Lord, no.
It's going to be in the close to $20 million to build
Yeah.
a school. That's just absolutely very interesting. Bill,
It's going to cost as much to build that as all the buildings we got put together.
Want to go back to your personal life just a little while now. You have two daughters, and you have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Now, does this kind of make you the patriarch of the whole thing, right?
Right.
Right. Now, since you're the big boss of this whole thing, how does it feel to have kids who have, shall we say, not necessarily excelled what you did, but are also equally as very powerful as you were during your years?
Or what?
Your kids are as successful as you were. Did you ever think that when you were over there as a sharecropper in Norton, you know, an itinerant farmer, did you ever think that you would ever achieve this kind of greatness?
Never.
No. And that your kids would have that kind of greatness. No. And that they would marry that kind of greatness. And you would have these grandchildren doing all these things. Did you ever think that?
No.
Isn't it wonderful? And you told me that you never thought that when you walked in front of Wines the tailor, that you would be his son-in-law.
No, I never did.
Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is, what are some of the other things, and we have only a couple of minutes, what are some of the other things that you never dreamed would happen in Wadsworth?
Well, one of the things that it's interesting, I think, when we look at, I like to give a lot of people credit. Now, you know, there used to be a Wadsworth Grange.
Yes, I remember. They used to have plays.
Huh?
They used to have plays.
Yeah, and they came to me one time, and they were going to build a Grange Hall behind what was Steiner's agency. So they bought the land behind Steiner's agency. Not many people know this. And we're going to build it. Well, as the farms contracted, there was less interest. So there wasn't enough interest in the Grange to build it. So they said, would you be interested in buying that land? It was right beside Isham School. And I said, yeah, we'd be interested. So we bought the land for $8,000 or $10,000. It was a couple acres. And then I said, well, what's going to happen to the Grange? They said it's going to fold. I said, what are you going to do with the money? Well, they don't know yet. I said, well, we need the land. That was quite a while back, across from Central School. And would you be interested in donating it for that? So we paid them $10,000 and they gave it back to us.
Wow.
And people don't know this, but when we bought it, we said, well, we'll name that Grange Field. So the playground used for Central School is really Grange Field.
Grange Field. Bill, quickly, we have only less than a minute left. Tell us where all of your offices were. Where were your offices located?
Well,
when I
started, I was in a closet right outside of the superintendent's office.
Right.
And then from there, I went down to the front of the building where they used to ring the bell, and then it was a bookstore. So I used that for a while, and then I was in the basement of the old Methodist church, and then in '63 we moved out to where it is now at Isham School.
At Isham School. And you were there all that time.
Uh-huh.
That was a new addition, was it not? That was a new addition at the time.
That's right.
A new addition. Bill, you don't know how happy we are that you were able to come today, because...
Well, I wish I could hear better.
Well, we both are a little bit, but we're all family, so it doesn't make any difference. Our people out there want to know what you had to say. They don't care about whether you can hear or not. We want to thank you because you have left a mark on Wadsworth that no one is going to be able to accomplish in many, many years to come. Not only personally, not only professionally, but just because of the things that you have done, which have really saved Wadsworth tons of money, And we need to stand here and salute you for that, and I hope that history will say that Bill Heyl helped to make our education system in Wadsworth as cheap as possible, and yet the administration made it as good as possible. So you did your share plus.
Well, I've always been very proud of our educational system.
And you have
going through it and working with it, and I appreciate them kind of recollecting about it.
You have done a phenomenal job. We are out of time, so thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.